Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle a term you hear thrown around all the time, geopolitical risk. What does it actually mean? Well, we're going to build a framework, a mental toolkit to help you assess, track, and really understand what's going on in our world. So, let's kick things off with a pretty big question. We all know we live in this super interconnected world, right? Trade, money, people, zipping all over the globe. But what happens when those connections, those threads holding it all together, start to fray or even snap? To figure that out, we're going to build this mental model together, step by step. First, we'll look at this shifting global web. Then, we'll get into the four main ways nations act. We'll cover the tools they use to get what they want, how to spot the big event risks, and finally, how the pros actually predict what's going to happen. All right, first things first, we've got to understand the playing field. And right now, the name of the game is globalization. It's the force that shapes, well, pretty much everything. So what is it, really? It's just this idea that everything's becoming more and more integrated. Markets for the stuff we buy, services, money, it's all linked up. And that means countries depend on each other more than they ever have in history. This creates some amazing opportunities for sure, but it also opens up some pretty serious vulnerabilities. And just look at this chart, it really shows you the scale we're talking about. For a huge part of the world, like developing East Asia, trade is a massive chunk of their entire economy. So for them, global relationships aren't just some nice to have. They are the absolute engine of their growth. It's critical. Okay, so we're all tangled up in this global web. How in the world do we make sense of all the different players and their moves? Well, a good place to start is to map out how they behave, which helps us get a handle on the potential risks. And here's how we can do it. We can map out a country's behavior on two key spectrums. First, are they leaning more towards globalization or nationalism? And second, are they generally cooperative or not so much? Thinking about it this way gives us this super simple but really powerful little grid. It lets us cut through all the noise of international relations, and boom, here's the grid. This gives us four basic playbooks, four archetypes for how a country can act. You can think of them as strategic postures. If you can figure out where a country sits on this map, you can start to understand why they do what they do and maybe even guess what they'll do next. Let's walk through each one. Okay, top left we have multilateralism. This is the all-for-one, one-for-all approach. These countries are big on both globalization and cooperation. The European Union is a classic example. It's designed specifically to make it easier for goods, money, and people to move across all its borders. Then there's bilateralism. This is a bit more of a me-first approach, but still cooperative. A country playing this game might not be into those huge global agreements. Instead, they'll focus on making specific one-on-one deals with other countries that directly benefit them. Next up, hegemony. This is where a big, dominant country has a global mindset but isn't all that interested in cooperating. They use their power, their economic or military muscle, to shape the rules of the game in their own favor. Think about a country suddenly slapping on tariffs without negotiating with anyone first. That's a hegemonic move. And finally, you've got the most extreme one, autarky. This is basically fortress mode, total nationalism, zero cooperation. The goal is to completely wall yourself off from the rest of the world and be totally self-sufficient. It's really hard to pull off, but a country like North Korea is probably the closest thing we have to a modern example. Okay, so countries have these four basic strategies. But here's the thing, they don't just pick a box and stay there. They actively use a whole toolkit to push for their agenda and move around on this map. And these tools pretty much fall into three big buckets. You've got your national security tools, things like military action or alliances. You've got economic tools, like trade deals or tariffs. And then you have financial tools, things like sanctions or providing capital. What's really interesting is that every single one of these tools can be used in two ways. They can be a carrot or a stick. You can use a tool to build bridges and increase cooperation, like with a free trade agreement. Or you can use that exact same type of tool to start a conflict, like with sanctions. The tool itself is neutral. It's the intention behind it that matters. So we have the map, we have the players, and we have the tools. How do analysts in the real world actually keep track of all this and assess the risk? Well, they don't just sit around waiting for something to blow up. They actively hunt for something called an event risk. Now, an event risk isn't some random disaster that comes out of nowhere. No, it's something that's already on the calendar. Think of an election, a new law being passed, or a big political anniversary. We know the event is coming, but we don't know the outcome. And that uncertainty is where the risk lies, because the result could totally change a country's direction. Brexit is the perfect case study for this. Everybody knew the referendum was happening on that specific date. It was a known event. But the outcome? That was a huge shock. And in one fell swoop, it started to unravel decades of cooperation and created these massive ongoing shockwaves for companies and investors. So when an analyst sees a huge event risk like Brexit looming on the horizon, what's their next move? How do they go from just monitoring the situation to actually preparing for it? Well, they don't pull out a crystal ball, they build scenarios. And the key here is that they're not trying to predict the one thing that will happen. That's a fool's game. Instead, the goal is to map out several different possible futures. It's about understanding the whole range of what could happen so you're not caught flat-footed no matter what. And there's a really logical way to do this. You start by figuring out your base case. What's the most likely outcome? Then you game out the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. When you do this, you stop betting on just one possibility, and you start preparing for all of them. It's a much smarter way to operate. And this is so important to get. A big geopolitical event is like dropping a rock in a pond. It doesn't just make one splash. It creates ripples, and then those ripples create more ripples. These secondary effects are incredibly hard to model with just numbers, which is exactly why this kind of qualitative, story-based scenario planning is so vital. So there you have it, a powerful framework to make sense of the global headlines. The next time you see something big happening, you can start to map a country's posture, spot the tools they're using, identify the event risks, and think in scenarios just like the pros do. You've got the model now to see the hidden dynamics at play. Which really just leaves us with one final big question to chew on. In this world of shifting alliances, are we headed for more cooperation, or is conflict becoming the new normal?